welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, delighted to be with you as always. A little bit later this week. It is, in fact, Wednesday, as you know, but delighted to be with you for another episode, another author interview. As we get started, I want to remind you, of course, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. It helps the algorithm, gets this podcast out to more listeners such as yourselves. If you are interested in supporting the podcast in a monetary fashion, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. You see that playing in the video next to me. You're also going to see it scrolling along the bottom of the episode throughout. You can support not only the podcast, but the network as a whole by going to this link. While you're there, leave a question or a comment. I'm happy to engage with those. I love hearing from you. But again, this really does help not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. That link is gsmcpodcast.net, and your support always appreciated, no matter what form that support takes. And you support this podcast in numerous ways. So I am grateful for all of your support throughout the years, whether you are a longtime viewer, listener, however you've been partaking of this podcast, or you've just found us. I'm glad you're here. Thank you so much. So how is your week going? It's Wednesday, middle of the week. My week has been good, just busy, worked all weekend. My old man, he just looks old when he walks, doesn't he? I don't know if you saw him in the background there, but that's the old man dog. Usually you see the puppy, but it was a good week. But this week I've had very late meetings because I work with a lot of different time zones in my non-podcast job. Actually, I work with a lot of time zones in this job as well, but I had a meeting last night at 9:30. They were in Central time zone, so for them it was 6:30, I believe. Although Arizona, I can't remember which way. I can't remember where Arizona. I'd have to look at the time zone converter. And then the night before, my last meeting was at 10 p.m., 10 to 11. And for her, she was 8 hours ahead in Asia. So for her, it was 6 a.m. I don't know which is worse. I do know which is worse. I'd be absolutely useless at 6 a.m. to do anything resembling coherent sentences. So I was very impressed with her. I mean, I thought 10 p.m. was late, but I tend to be more of a night owl, so it was okay for me. And then I just went to bed afterwards. She actually said she went back to bed after the 6 a.m. meeting, so good for her. I was happy to hear that. But it's just, yeah, it's a lot of different areas to keep track of and figure out who's in what time zone and what time we can meet. Thank goodness for the internet and time zone converters, so I don't always have to do the math myself. It's very helpful. But that was this week. This weekend was busy, didn't get out much, but have still been taking the dogs for their walks. My husband is even busier than I am right now. If I have a million meetings, he has 7 million meetings. So we've been quite busy, and it's good. It's fine. It's not sustainable forever to go at this pace, but for right now it's okay, and we've got some time off coming up soon, so we will both enjoy that. But let's talk about books, because that's why you are here. And this week I have a new author, has not been on the podcast before. Patrick Canning is joining me to talk about his book, For Your Benefit. You see the cover there next to me. We're going to talk about that cover because it's very reminiscent of books that were on my parents' bookshelves when I was a child. I'm sure you've seen books with this kind of cover, and we do talk about that. But let me give you the description of this book. Teddy Lint is the kindest private investigator on the planet, committed to seeing the best in everyone he meets. The detective agency he runs out of a Los Angeles strip mall with his brother Ralph has seen a strange case or two before, but never anything like this. A man claiming to work for the CIA hires the Lints to find a shipping container of radioactive Agent Orange that vanished over 50 years ago. He insists someone is planning on using an army of drones to drench LA with the deadly chemicals before the week is out. The Lint brothers enter a maze of bizarre suspects, from nefarious ad executives to anarchistic Boy Scouts to a toga-clad militia fighting for exclusive rule by women. The propaganda-obsessed society that seems to be running the world is probably worth looking into as well. The power of empathy collides with the dangers of disinformation as Teddy fights to save the people he loves. Our beloved detective doesn't give up easily, but any Angelinos with an aversion to death by herbicide might want to dust off that umbrella just in case. If that if that description, that blurb didn't intrigue you, I don't know what will. When I previewed this episode last week, I just read you that line: the power of empathy collides with the dangers of disinformation, because I think that sums up a lot of this. I didn't want to give too much away by reading that paragraph before, A, because it's a tongue twister, but I mean, bizarre suspects, to say the least. Ad executives, nefarious ad executives, anarchistic Boy Scouts, toga-clad militia fighting for exclusive rule by women, and propaganda-obsessed society. I mean, come on, that is a cast of characters that you want to know more about. This book is bizarre in the best possible way. It's going to keep you guessing just in terms of who we're going to encounter next. You're just never quite sure what character is going to show up next in this book, and it is awesome. I loved not knowing. I loved not knowing what the heck was around each and every corner. I really liked Teddy as the main character. I think you'll like him too, but that full cast of characters is absolutely amazing. Let's go ahead now and talk about this book with the author. Again, the book is For Your Benefit. The author is Patrick Canning. Hi, Patrick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I'm excited to talk about For Your Benefit. But before we get to the book, could you take a few minutes just to share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Patrick Canning. I am an author of 5 self-published books, and For Your Benefit being the fifth. And my books run a range genre-wise, but generally they tend to have sort of a comedic angle, unique characters, and sort of an offbeat plot, which I would say definitely applies to this book. And I currently live in Chicago with my dog Hank, and I'm drinking Irish breakfast tea, and it's very good.
Oh, very good. That does sound nice. Plain, sugar, cream, what you got in there?
Plain, just, straight
Purist.
to, yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds very good. So you mentioned For Your Benefit. That's the newest book. Can you give an overview of the story?
Absolutely. So, For Your Benefit follows Teddy, who is described often as the kindest private detective in the world. And he and his brother run a detective agency, and they get embroiled in a a very complicated and wandering tale in Los Angeles. Takes place in the present day. And essentially, what has happened is there was a shipping container filled with Agent Orange that went missing after the Vietnam War. And a client comes in and says that somebody has found it, and he tasks the brothers with locating it themselves. And that sets them off into this sort of jungle of wild characters and interesting locations as they try to figure out what exactly is going on.
Yes, that is the simplest way you can put that.
Yeah.
Nicely. You've done that before. Um, Teddy is kind of, I don't know, if Mr. Rogers was African American and grew up in a cult.
Sounds about right. Yeah, as we've all imagined. But
Right.
yeah, I'm a huge Mr. Rogers fan, but I just thought a private investigator story like this, often traffics into seedy locations, and I think we're all pretty familiar with the hard-edged, world-weary detective, which can be a great character for sure, but we've seen it a lot of times, and so I just kind of wanted to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and see what it would look like if we dropped the nicest guy in the world into these situations and see how that can help him, but also be a liability at times. But hopefully, there's a nice contrast between Teddy and the places he's forced to go.
Yeah. So was Teddy your inspiration or jumping off point for the story, or was his character just kind of developed as part of the story?
It a little bit, it kind of all comes at once, or it did with this book, I would say. So, as far as kind of why I wanted to tell the story, I knew I did want to do a detective story. One of my previous books is a mystery, but it's a bit more um, traditional in terms of like placing clues and they all pay off. And I knew I wanted to do something that was a little more off the rails, a little more playful in terms of style and whether or not things pay off and what information characters have or don't have. So I knew I wanted that style of story. And thematically, I knew it would be about sort of how we value truth or don't value truth, which I think has a natural fit for a detective story. In this book, it manifests most directly in terms of advertising, which I would say is not terribly concerned with the truth, and we see kind of some of the consequences that can have. And then the last element would definitely be Teddy, where kind of like I said, a lot of ideas for me can be interesting if it's just something I haven't seen a lot of before. And
Mhm.
so hopefully having a slightly more less conventional character leading what is more familiar in terms of a LA private detective story. You know, there's such a storied history of the classic detectives in LA from, you know, old film noir all the way up to The Big Lebowski. And I make a lot of movie references when I probably should be making book references. But in any case, I think it's sort of a rich history of having weird pockets to explore within the city, but trying to have the person exploring it be something a little different.
Yeah. Please take this next comment as the compliment that it is intended, because it's going to
Uh-oh.
sound maybe backhanded. This
Okay.
book is like a fever dream of epic proportions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yes.
is that how your brain works, or do you have to like work at writing in this style?
It probably is, but also I did want that specifically for this story. So to definitely kind of drop people in past their depth. And so, kind of the example I usually use is the book opens with Tom Hanks being in their office,
Yes.
and he never shows up again. And so it's
Is it
sort of
Tom
just a
Hanks? Is it
way,
not Tom Hanks? That I spent the first
right?
chapter
And
going, what the
and
heck
it's
is
kind of
happening?
awkward because you don't know what's going on and why he's there, and it's sort of to start the reader wrong-footed in a certain sense. Not that they question what is reality, but you just from page one, we're kind of doing something else, and
Yeah.
so I just think that is a fun story to have as long as it's done well, ideally, and it's kind of short enough because you have to play with the reader if they're willing to kind of go on this journey, but you don't want to give them a ton of dead ends or you know, things that don't go anywhere. So I think it's definitely a balancing act in terms of dealing with people's patience and willingness to go along on something, but hopefully it all ties together in the end in a certain sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you're thinking like I was thinking, Tom Hanks, what? This is a really good way to start the book because you do not know if the, you don't know what's happening. Like maybe like me, I spent the first couple of pages thinking, is this a dream? Is Teddy having a dream and he's going to wake up and Tom Hanks isn't really in the waiting room of his detective agency? Or maybe this is a Tom Hanks. I mean, we are in LA. It could be an actor who looks like Tom Hanks, a Tom Hanks impersonator, if you will. Tom Hanks has a brother who sounds very much like him, who looks very much like him. Maybe that's something. No, and we never get really any more explanation after that. It's just Tom Hanks shows up, and at that point, you have no idea who you are going to encounter next. And it's just this crazy, somewhat delightful, very bizarre ride through this cast of characters. We're going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, delightful cast of characters, yes, but also some heavy topics that are covered in this book. So balancing humor, a little bit of wackiness, and some very serious topics. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Patrick Canning. As we get into this second break, your final reminder that if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, you may do so by going to gsmcpodcast.net. Again, you can also leave a question, leave me a comment. I'm happy to engage with those. I love hearing from you. But again, if you want to support the podcast in a monetary fashion, go to gsmcpodcast.net. You can leave a tip or a donation. It's greatly appreciated. All support, whatever forms that support takes, always greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for being a part of the podcast for all of these years. Before the break, we were talking about never quite knowing what character is going to be around the corner next. Never being fully sure of what character. And one thing I really like about Teddy as the main character is how effortlessly he interacts with all of these sometimes wacky, sometimes baffling secondary characters. He has this just amazing ability to interact with them, make them feel at ease, make them feel seen and heard. And he and his brother balance each other really well in the personality department. But I aspire to be Teddy. I don't think I'm ever that at ease with people, and I don't make them feel that at ease. But if I had a superpower, I would like for that to be part of it. So let's go ahead and return to the conversation with Patrick. So speaking of balance, there's a lot of humor in the book. There's a lot of, as you say, kind of surreal situations they find themselves in. But there's also heavier issues, chemical warfare. You mentioned advertising and disinformation. So for you, how do you balance the weightier elements with the humor?
Sure. I think it's definitely something that editing, you really benefit by the editing process and rewriting. And once you have the initial idea out there, going through and trying to feel out what the story needs at any given moment. And for me, that's when beta readers and editors really can help quite a bit, because once you've read the story so many times and you lose objectivity with it, they can bring the fresh perspective of saying, this was jarring when we switched to this, which can be useful if you're trying to do something with it. But if it's unintentional, you kind of want to smooth that out. So it's, like you said, there are very serious issues dealt with in this book. I would say, namely Agent Orange and aspects of the Vietnam War. And you don't want to treat that flippantly ever, because it's, a horrible real world thing. But it's being incorporated into this offbeat narrative, so it can only exist in certain ways in this universe. But I think you just have to take care to treat that appropriately. And then as far as mood, with regard to being playful with the reader, I think it's fun to go left when they think you're going to go right. And so if things are getting serious, knowing when to pivot into something a little comedic or confusing, and vice versa. So it's all just kind of feeling it out and trying to get some feedback as to what the reader experiences as you're going through it, without the overhead view that the author has, because they're just experiencing it chronologically, and that is a different sort of metric than when you're constructing it yourself.
Yeah. let's talk a little bit more about Teddy as the protagonist. Was it a challenge or was it fairly simple for you to write him as the kindest private detective to ever exist, but also make him still human and relatable? Was that a challenge for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think you don't want it to become, or I didn't want his character to become one note in that sense. And so it was all a bit of a challenge to find out how this would actually work. And it's not just, you don't just say he's the nicest guy and that's all there is to it. It's how does he actually view the world, and how does he keep that resilience when dealing with so many people that give him opportunities to be terrible, but he always chooses uh, to be kind. And so I think, yeah, that was the trick with Teddy, is to try to make it feel like a real character and not sort of a one note joke that that's the only aspect of his personality. And so he does kind of struggle at times. And as we mentioned, Mr. Rogers, like that was such an informative source for me, because Mr. Rogers was, of course, a real person, but making it be a choice that they make to treat people a certain way rather than it being strictly an inherent quality that they're sort of a slave to. It's more so the outlook they have on the world, and so making sure that that's represented as why Teddy is choosing to live this way, and then what it implies thematically for the rest of the elements of the story.
Yeah. I think for me with Teddy, what really helped to humanize him was, and this isn't a spoiler because we find out very early in the book that Teddy and his brother, their father is dying.
Mhm.
And Teddy's really not dealing with that in any kind of healthy way.
Right.
Um, so that for me added that layer of humanity to him. So he's not just this sort of one note, oh, he's kind about everything and everything is fine and he interacts in ways that are perfectly healthy. No.
Right, exactly. And so I think that's a perfect example that I probably should have brought up, but I'm glad you did. That it can leave him with blind spots, and so it's not necessarily about surface level polite interactions for him. I always choose the word kindness rather than niceness, although I think they're pretty similar. But kindness to me implies more of a depth of feeling and a genuineness. Um, but like you said, Teddy can also choose, that can lead him to not engage with certain difficult things, namely the illness of his father. And so that's one of the, I think, arcs that he goes on through the story in terms of retaining who he is, but also being able to engage with the world, and hopefully still remaining who he is despite the challenges.
Yeah. In terms of characters, the cast of characters is intense. I usually ask about character development and how much you do before you write, but there's so many eclectic characters in this. Where did you even start?
And for me, I think it's things seem to be working best when it's going hand in hand in terms of plot development and character development. Ideally, it's a bit seamless. I know we always talk about them as two separate things, but um, like I said, a lot of the ideas for a story arrive for me at the same time. So the plot's being developed in tandem with the characters, and hopefully throughout the story, they're just kind of feeding into each other as instead of being two disparate elements. But this story does, as you said, have quite a few characters, and the format of the story, it being a detective story, allows for a lot of fun, exaggerated, sort of absurd characters where it's like, oh, we're gonna go check this guy out and see what he knows, and of course, it's like the craziest person you've ever met, or they're doing something weird, and so that is fun in terms of getting to explore a range of personalities, and kind of you just never know who's behind the next door. But even to the same point as I was saying with Teddy, you don't, to a certain extent, if they're secondary characters, they might be a little bit one note because they're more servicing the plot. But it's also fun to try and play with the reader's expectation where they might turn out to be sort of a legitimate person and there's a reason they are that way. And I think that feeds into Teddy giving people the benefit of the doubt and trying to find out who they are, even though their first interaction might be pretty off-putting or confusing.
Mm-hmm. Were there any characters that you decided were either too strange or that needed to be cut, or were they just mainly cut because they didn't further the plot?
I don't think any characters were cut. No. No, I don't think that happened. So it was, all the crazy people made it into the story, and they're there to throw roadblocks in front of Teddy.
And they do.
Yes, it is.
Can we talk about the cover? Because it reminds me of books from my childhood. There's a very specific look. So how much input did you have into the cover?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a huge fan of old mass market paperbacks. I would say sort of like 60s era, and just the little guys that you can basically fit into your back pocket. And they have sort of a pulpy quality in terms of the artistic style. But from the get-go, I knew that I wanted to try that as far as the cover design went. And so both with the size and just the overall formatting of the book, that's what I was going for. And then I was able to work with an illustrator to do the cover, and I generally don't do characters on the cover, which is sort of a no-no in writing, I feel like, because readers want to envision them for themselves. But I feel like it was a little bit of this pulpy era where it's just like, here's the characters and that's what they look like. And so it sort of worked for this book in particular, but generally I understand the distaste for showing the reader what the characters look like. But hopefully it sort of echoes that era of, cheap paperbacks. The cover's weathered and has sort of creases on it and things like that, just to emulate that style and hopefully evoke for any other fans of that style of book having that same experience. And so I think I got pretty close. It's not 100% there, but I'm really happy with how it came out.
Yeah, it definitely evokes those books. Well, I always think when I think of those kinds of books, the edges of the paper were always that weird yellow, like
Yeah.
just
Which was one thing I was going to try and emulate and just couldn't with the printing process, but and the smell as well. You can't really put that old book smell into a
Right.
new book.
Yeah.
Check in again in like 50 years and we'll see how it's doing.
I was gonna say somebody has to invent that at some point. Like old books, they have new car smell. Why can't they have old book smell?
That's right. And we got it on tape. That was my idea. So that
Yours, you get credit, absolutely. Old book smell. It has to exist, right? There has to be a candle or something. Somebody tell me if there's already a candle that's old book smell, or there's probably not a car air freshener that's old book smell, but this scent has to exist, right? I just don't know about it. I'm sure I've seen a meme at least with it, but who knows? Is that real? Is it AI? That's the question you can ask about life in general. But I told you we'd talk about the book cover, and now you get more of the backstory there. Like I said, this book is so reminiscent of so many books that were on my parents' bookshelves and in the library when I was growing up. The very, that yellow color along the edges of the pages, and it's very nostalgic. So thank you, Patrick, for giving me for unlocking that memory that I hadn't really thought about in a while, but definitely thought about as soon as I saw the book cover for your benefit. We're going to go ahead and take our next break. When we come back, we'll be talking about research that Patrick did for the book. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Patrick Canning. Before the break, we were talking about the overall look of the book and that kind of old school pulp fiction look that it has. And this actually just came up in one of my English lessons. Have I ever mentioned that I teach English as a foreign language? I talk about everything on this podcast, so I probably have. If that's old news, then you already know it. If I've never said it, I don't know why. But I teach English as a foreign language, and pulp fiction came up somehow in conversation the other day. So I was trying to explain that particular idiom to a person who is learning English. It is really fun and challenging sometimes to explain English phrases and idioms to people whose first language is not English. Sometimes try to define a word without using that word, or it's a challenge. And sometimes my brain just goes, nope, not helping you out today. But thankfully the internet exists, and sometimes you just have to look it up and give them examples. Random. Let's get back to the conversation with Patrick. In terms of research, what kinds of research did you do for the story? Anything that particularly stands out for you?
Sure. This book didn't have too much. I lived in LA for 18 years, so I knew where I wanted the characters to go and sort of what the overall mood influenced by the city would be. As far as elements I didn't know a lot about, I read a book about David Ogilvy, who was an advertising magnate, because one of the characters in the book works in advertising. And just to sort of get a feel for how they think and speak, and very much sort of a Mad Men-esque type character, David Ogilvy, and Edward Bernays, who features pretty prominently in the book, he's considered the father of public relations. And he was this guy in sort of the early 20th century who wrote a book called Propaganda, basically exploring the psychology of mass influence and how to get groups of people mostly to buy things, but the philosophy and the techniques also scale up to disinformation and propaganda, as the book is called. And it's very sort of shameless in its exploration of propaganda, in that I think now it has a negative connotation, and deservedly so, but he was kind of all on board with it. And so he was an interesting guy, and he's sort of worshipped by some characters in this book. And then lastly, as you brought up before, we talk about Agent Orange quite a bit. And I did want to learn more about it just because it's interesting, but also to our point earlier that if you're dealing with real world terrible things in a sort of tongue-in-cheek book, it is a bit of a delicate dance, because you don't want to make light of things, although it's only going to fit into your story in a certain way, but you don't want to get facts wrong, and you don't want to be careless in your presentation. So there was a lot of, learning about Agent Orange and how terrible it was, and it really was so bad, and people are still suffering from it today. But that was definitely a research topic I wanted to make sure I got as right as possible, just because it is such a serious subject.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a bit like asking someone about their favorite child, but of all of the characters in this book, because there's so many and they're so very different,
Yeah.
do you have a favorite, or was there one that was particularly fun to write?
I mean, it's probably Teddy, but that's kind of a boring answer because he's the protagonist. The client that comes in, whose name is Dixon Woodbine, was very fun to write, because he's very over the top and like this larger than life character, and he has such a broad, over the top way of speaking. And I did the audiobook for this book myself for the first time, and that was such a fun character to do. And I apologize for his foghorn leghorn accent, but that's how it's described in the book. And so a character like that, who just basically has no reservations about anything, can be fun to drop into, especially a detective situation where they're trying to look for little clues, and he just like walks into a room and touches whatever he wants and shouts about whatever he wants. And so a character like that can be fun to re-up the energy or just see what they do next, because obviously he has a lot more depth to him, and there are reasons why he is the way he is. But especially at the outset of the book, he's kind of just a bull in a china shop, and that can be a lot of fun to write.
But he needs to stop drinking Mrs. Beecham's coffee.
Exactly, exactly.
Uh,
He drinks way too much coffee, more than doctors would ever recommend. So
Beecham or Beauchamp?
I say Beauchamp, but I'm not French, so it's kind of a shot in the dark.
Yeah, that's one of those names that either is just completely weirdly pronounced as Beecham. It doesn't look a thing like Beecham, or yeah,
Right.
there's a million ways you could.
And that's the thing, like I said, with the audiobook, where if you're writing the book, you can kind of get away with just writing it and not worrying
Right.
about how it's pronounced. But then all of a sudden you realize there are tons of words that people kind of disagree on which way it is. And so I try to look it up beforehand, and inevitably a couple months later, I'll find some definitive source that says, no, it was the other way. So
Of course. Yeah, that sounds about right. So you don't always write in the genre, in a detective genre. So do you just kind of write whatever genre the story seems to dictate, or is it more mood, or how do you choose genre?
I do, yes. So my personal take on genre is that it's something that should be backed into, so that you have your initial idea wherever that comes from, and you get it on the page, you explore it, and essentially just try to see what it is and then make it more like itself, whatever that might mean. So part of it is honoring your original intention and original idea, but also a willingness to go where the story goes. And inevitably, when the story's done, it's going to land somewhere in genre land. And for me, my books personally, it's usually adjacent to something or a combination of things. And that can be tricky for readers to follow you from book to book. And it's sort of a nightmare marketing wise, because eventually you do have to pitch it to agents, you do have to put it in a category on Amazon. But so, and I think it's totally okay to write to genre and emphasize the strengths of that genre or subvert expectations. But just the way I do things, it just starts with the story, and then at the end, I kind of look at it and go, "Oh, it's this kind of story," and then it's for me just more secondary as a marketing consideration. But it can make things trickier for you when you're trying to put the book out there. And the only concern I would have is you don't want to misrepresent the book, because readers have expectations, and that can really affect how they like or don't like a book. And so you want to try and be clear about what the book is. But yeah, as far as genre, I would say I always end up in some sort of middle ground, but that's the way it is.
But I think I hope that that's changing. Like we need more categories, or you need to be able to choose more than just one on the drop down of the drop down menu of genre. Like most books feel like they have more than one genre most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think overall, what art needs or always needs is just original infusion of original ideas. And I think nowadays, a lot of stuff, even with books, but art in general, is remixes of things we've seen before, and it's rehashed IP and sequels and reboots. And I think if you're striving for something more original, it can be less defined and a little trickier to categorize. Not that it's that might be a bad thing too, but that it's probably worth it to just put something to people as it is and let them figure out kind of where it lands in terms of the media landscape, I guess.
Yeah. You said the phrase genre land earlier, and my brain went on a total little trip to a theme park, a book-based theme park called Genre Land.
Your eyes rolled back in your head for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I want that to exist.
That's another great idea. We're just
coming up with them. You heard it here first, everyone. Are you working on anything new currently?
Absolutely. So I am in the composition phase of a science fiction book, which I've never done before, which is very obviously science fiction. I know I made a big speech about how I don't know what the genre is, but it's pretty obvious for this one. And I'm very excited for it. It's basically it's very different than anything I've done before, but essentially it follows a group of people who are consider humanity's current trajectory to be a bad one, just the state of the world today. And their fix is to build an ideal city, which you could say utopia. They try to avoid the word, but and sort of a redesigned society. And so that is basically the setup for it. But it is, yeah, it's. We'll see how it goes. It's still coming together.
I'm guessing things are going to go wrong at some point, but that's just,
Absolutely.
I mean,
You got to have that. Although, but I will say with utopian stories, um, I feel like they're always just a setup to a punchline, and it's like, oh, we have this wonderful city, but then the main character finds out, they use babies in a furnace for fuel, and so I really, hopefully, it's a very optimistic, futuristic story because there's so many dystopian stories which again are great, but I feel like it's sort of covered at this point. And the only like optimistic sci-fi property I can think of is Star Trek, where it's what if we did do a couple things right? What does that look like? And I think that can be important to give people that kind of vision of we can, change the way things end up. And of course, there's still drama in the story and conflict, otherwise the story wouldn't exist. But having them be sort of actual things to come up against in the future instead of just like I was saying with utopian stories, it's usually just a lesson in hubris or over reliance on technology. And I feel like those themes have been explored, and let's try something different.
right. Soylent Green is people. We know. We,
Yeah.
we're expecting it. So
Exactly.
make us expect it and then not get it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Write that down.
Okay. We're just coming up with all the good ideas in this podcast. But I am intrigued by that current work in progress because often you feel like with dystopian, utopian novels, you pretty much know something's going to go terribly wrong. So it'd be interesting to read, to see where the conflict comes in without it being something terrible and horrible and catastrophic. So I'm definitely intrigued and looking forward to the work in progress when it becomes the published work rather than the work in progress. We're going to go ahead and take our final, whoa, dog. We're going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we come back, how Patrick decided to write for publication. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Patrick Canning. Before the break, we were talking about his current work in progress. I am intrigued, looking forward to that coming out. Let's go ahead and wrap up the conversation with Patrick. In terms of writing, something you always wanted to do, or did you decide later in life? How did you come to decide to write for publication?
Yeah, I've always been a creative type person, which is to say I'm bad at sports and don't have, business acumen. So if I'm good at anything, maybe it's more artsy type stuff. But I initially went to film school and worked in film and got into screenwriting. And it was one of those things where it just occurred to me one day that you could write a book, and I wanted to try it and see if I could do it. And then as soon as I did it, I totally loved it. And so I've probably been writing for about 8 years now in terms of prose writing, and that's all I want to do from now on. So I would say always been a creative type, but it took me a little while to figure out that I wanted to be an author. But now I have always more ideas than I know what to do with. And it's just a matter of the writing process can be lengthy for novels. So it takes a little time, but I'm always excited to finish what I'm working on and start on the next thing.
Excellent. Any particular piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to write or thinks they want to write?
I think as sort of general broad advice with the arts in general is I think the difference between success and not success is usually perseverance, that a lot of people have to stick around and you have to hope you line up with the zeitgeist and you're refining your own skills, and it can take time. And so I think fighting discouragement is always a big part of it. Because for me, writing has its own challenges. The creative process can be tricky and frustrating, but usually it's kind of the outside world that makes it difficult as you're trying to sell your books and, figure out your writing schedule and things like that. So for anyone that wants to do it, just try to remember why you wanted to do it in the first place and work hard, but be nice to yourself and give yourself time. And I think a lot of people beat themselves up when their first book doesn't do what they hoped it would do. And that's okay. You can write the next one. That's the great thing about writing is kind of, they say you can write yourself out of bad situations and you can always write your next story. So just, if you want to do it, stick with it and give yourself space to do it, because there's a lot of people doing it. There's a lot of factors outside of your control, and just try to focus on the work as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you. When you take time to read, just for you, favorite authors, go-to genres?
So two of my favorite authors that informed this book in particular are Kurt Vonnegut and Thomas Pynchon. And they've been some of my favorites for a long time, but I felt like I got an opportunity in this book to more closely echo some of the things I like about their books. So, Kurt Vonnegut has such great dark humor, but really woven with, oh boy, cut that out, with sort of big heart and real humanity. Because I think you don't want to, if you're writing comedically, you can get too clever or get really caught up in the elements of humor, which are important, but in the end, it's all coming back to something real and important. And so I think Kurt Vonnegut is sort of the best at that. And as far as Thomas Pynchon, I think he's got such great labyrinthine plots and bizarre characters, and things are dense and sort of unknowable to a certain extent. And so I think this book's much friendlier to the reader than some of his stories, but both of those guys, I think, are doing really interesting things that I felt like this story could echo in a certain sense. And so you can't go wrong with any of their books. So.
Okay, thanks. If people want to know more about you and the books, website and any social media that you're active on.
Yes. So Patrick Canning Books is my website, and that's got information on all the books I've put out so far, some short stories I've done, and my the only social media I have is Instagram, which is @catpanning, which I try to use less and less because social media is terrible, but we all got to do it. So mostly on there are pictures of my dog, but also I try to do interesting things for the release of each book. So for your benefit, I was kind of making videos around Chicago, and so yeah, it's going to be a mix of book release information and pictures of my dog.
Pictures of your dog, I think, are lots of people will appreciate that.
Those always do the best. The like ratio is heavily favors the dog pictures.
Nice. There's just a random line in one of the scenes in the book that somebody got somebody got kicked out or punished or something for interacting with a brand on social media.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yes. That always drives me crazy. That's 100% me putting my own grievances into the book, where it's like they think it's fun when a brand is like quirky on Twitter or whatever, and it's just like it's not your friend. Don't talk to it.
Yeah, very good. Patrick, is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure you highlighted during our time together?
That about does it. This is the book. So if any of that sounds interesting, please check it out. And if you do check it out, please either review it or you can email me from the website. I always love to just hear how the work lands with people. If it meant something, if it didn't, if it was confusing. Authors always love to hear feedback, even if it's bad. You can send me, some hate mail and I'll still read it. So that's what I'd say. Check it out.
All right. Don't encourage the hate mail, though.
Well, send that to Sarah. Send that to Sarah.
No.
Or just don't send it. Don't send it.
Just write it and burn it.
Yeah.
Like
take a walk. Drink some Irish breakfast tea.
Exactly. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk to me about the book and some interesting tangents. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you again to Patrick for joining me to talk about For Your Benefit. If you are a fan of detective novels, then check this one out. It's not your average detective novel, and that's definitely part of its charm. But if you're a fan of that genre, check this one out. If you are a fan of character-driven novels where the characters often are the plot twists, definitely check this one out. But also, like I said, Teddy, as a main character, I really liked Teddy. I really felt I resonated a lot with Teddy. I appreciated him as a character, just the way he interacted with everyone in the book, the way he saw the world, but he was also not perfect. It could be very easy to make Teddy this golden idealized character who just gets along with everyone and he understands everyone and everything's just shiny, perfect, wonderful. And it's not. He's got his flaws as well, and we talked a little bit about that. Just a very kind, empathetic character, which you do not often get in detective novels, right? They're often, hard-boiled, or they have past trauma, which Teddy certainly has, but he is dealing with his trauma very differently than most other detectives that you read about. So definitely recommend this one if you are looking for something to read. And Patrick has other books that are not exactly like this. He writes, as he said, across genres in a variety of different genres, but if you like this one, maybe try some of the others and see where you go from there. But thank you to Patrick for joining me. Thank you, of course, as always, to you for joining me for this episode. I hope you will join me next time. Of course, I hope that. Next time, I have returning author Carter Wilson coming back to the podcast. Is this his fourth time on the podcast? I think it's the fourth time he's joined. Second video episode. I think my math is right. My math could be completely wrong, but he's been on the podcast multiple times. He, as you know, if you're a longtime listener / watcher, I need a better word. Somebody give me a better word that covers both the audio and the video portions of the iterations of this podcast. He writes thrillers, if you've seen or heard his other interviews, and this one is a thriller. We've got true crime podcast. But of course, it's a thriller, so things go wrong very quickly, and I'm not going to tell you what things go wrong, but Tell Me What You Did is the name of the podcast. It's the concept of the podcast, and it's what gets the main character and podcast host in a definite pickle, if you want to put it that way. It's worse than a pickle. It's bad because it's a thriller. So she has to figure out how to get out of that. We as the readers don't know what is going to happen. So join me for the conversation with Carter, where we aren't going to tell you how she gets out of the situation, because why give away the ending of a thriller? But still, join us for the conversation and learn more about Tell Me What You Did by Carter Wilson. In the meantime, I hope that you are having a great week. Hope it's Wednesday, middle of the week. Hope you've got some good plans for the weekend coming up. Hope your week so far has been okay. or in June. Happy Pride if you celebrate. It's also I don't want to get the name wrong, so I'm not going to go there, but there's other things celebrated this month. I don't want to get them incorrect, but happy whatever is being celebrated this month. That's vague. I apologize. Happy June. Hope your week is going well this first week of June. Whatever life is throwing at you. Well, before we get to that, couple of things. If you could do a few things, it would be very helpful. Like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're either listening to or watching this episode on. Helps the algorithm, gets this podcast out to more readers such as yourselves. Also, leaving a review, super helpful. Do it for your authors, do it for your podcasts. Algorithms rule the world, so help them out with positive reviews. If you're on social media, you can follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Love hearing from you, so come find the podcast, ask me questions, leave comments, tell me what you're reading, etc., 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 to quote the King and I hope you're having a great week. Whatever's coming your way this week, though, I hope that you have plenty of time, as always, to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to